Good afternoon, everybody, those of you here in the hall at Bacon's College and those of you joining us online from wherever. I'm Simon Hughes, and together with Carol Bates, we are co-facilitating this wonderful conference, and we had a great morning this morning, which I hope you enjoyed. I have the huge privilege of introducing our next speaker. Now, I went up to Mel a minute or two ago and owned up to the fact that apart from what I'd read in the programme and doing a bit of Googling for the last 10 minutes, I knew nothing else about her. But I now feel as if we're really good friends. She thinks Zara is a very good fashion outlet. Voila, évidence. She has a phenomenal CV, apart from that which you've read. Aberdonian by birth and upbringing, single mum, noisy family, thinks that getting used to the church is like getting used to one of those sorts of families. Came down south to her university at Oxford. She tells me, this is almost too huge to even contemplate, that she has 6 degrees. We could have a competition. 5 degrees. Oh, 5 degrees. I'm sorry, 5 degrees. Oh, there's probably another one in the pipeline. So anybody later has more degrees. Perhaps we can have a Miles bar prize for anybody who has more degrees. So 5 degrees. Degrees mainly at Oxford, but also Toronto and elsewhere. As if that wasn't enough, she then deserted Oxford to go to do her theological training in Westcott. She's done a curacy, I think, in West London. We didn't talk about that, but I assume it's true because it says so on Google or somewhere. And she's now about to embark on her 3rd university chaplaincy role in a different Oxford college. And that's pretty impressive as well. Last thing, she has a little fella, Clement, who I've just seen a picture of, who looks absolutely gorgeous. So I think she's the best person to keep you all awake in the slot immediately after lunch. She knows how to deal with little ones. She's spent a lot of her life dealing with students. She knows she loves lecturing. So I think we're in for a treat, and it gives me great, great pleasure to introduce the Reverend Dr. Melanie Marshall to give us our afternoon slot for today.
I do love Zara, but even more, I love COS. Ladies for the black clerical attire, COS. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. And if I may, I'd like to begin with a story. A couple of years ago, I was walking through the quadrangle of the college where I was then chaplain. And a teenager who was there on an open day hailed me. And he pointed at a building and said, "What's that?" I said, "It's the chapel." "What's a chapel?" he asked. So I explained it's like a church or a cathedral, except it's attached to another institution. And his reply was, "What's a church?" We hardly know where to begin with a gulf that size. But I would like to sketch a bit of a beginning today, and to suggest that a good beginning to bridging that gulf might be less to consider what we as a church have to teach teenagers and young adults, and more what teenagers and young adults have to teach us as a church. I'd like to say a little bit about the relationship between the church and the academy, just briefly, as in some ways institutions which mirror one another. And then, for the rest of the time, I'd like to expand a little bit on our Christian vocation to things that students are masters of, namely, wasting time and making friends. But first, the church and the academy. Institutionally, the church and academy have less to do with one another now than they have had in the last 1,000 years. The student that I spoke to had no idea that the chapel was there first and that the university grew out of that place of worship, not vice versa. Why would he? Theology is less and less a popular degree among those who are not training for orders. And the training of our ordained people and lay ministers is less and less connected directly with universities. But at a not institutional level, the church and the academy have a number of interesting things in common. One, they have a shared calling, and that is a calling to dedicate time and space simply to becoming more human. Another thing they have in common is that many Christian ministers and academics report that the 20th and 21st century trend towards bureaucracy and managerialism, in other words, secularization, seem to be making that core vocation harder to live out. A third thing that the church and the university have in common is that along with other public bodies in the last few years, we have had to make big changes. We have not always been places of belonging, and I do mean belonging, not inclusion, which seems to me something that one group assumes the right to extend to another. I mean belonging to every nation and tribe and people and language, as the Revelation foretells. As a church, we have had to humble ourselves in the last few years to really start learning from Christians whom previously we assumed with great arrogance didn't have anything to teach us. And here's my question. Could we also have the humility to learn how to be a better church from people who literally do not know the meaning of that word? I think we can. Students are overwhelmingly young, unchurched by background, atheist by conviction. But I've spent the last 2 decades in schools and universities, and I can tell you that when it comes to wasting time on being human, there are no flies on students. And if they, quite untrained, are naturals, what I want to say today is that so is every single one of us. It is what we were made for. Attention is the natural prayer of the soul, untutored. Anyone can do it. Bishop Christopher said in his welcome that he hoped that we would find encouragement from one another today. And I'm glad, because I've written here, I want to offer encouragement. I want to encourage you to believe this thing, if you remember nothing else I say after that delicious curry, this thing. You are enough, just as you are. Every person here has within them everything they need to be a minister of Christ's gospel. That the gift of our time and ourselves is not only the greatest, it is perhaps the only gift. And to have encouragement to take to heart the thing that actually we all already know, that there is nothing that is less of a waste of time than wasting time. So, these many degrees with which I frittered away my 20s, a couple were in Roman history, and here's a story from Roman history. There was a man who'd been enslaved in some salt mines in a remote province, and he was shipped to Rome and just dumped on the quay. And a group of Christians come rushing in, and they start feeding him and bathing his wounds. And he says to them in wonder, "Why are you doing this? I'm not your family." How wrong he was. We are a family to anyone who needs one. And families, ideally, are places of care. And they're also places of formation. They're where we become the people we're going to be. Mother Church gives us a name and an identity in baptism, and she also gives us an upbringing. So I'd like to talk a little bit now about what we need to be brought up. Well, we know what we need. We need nourishment. We need discipline. We need education. We need comfort. And the church, I hope, offers us all that. But there is something else that we need to grow up. Some of you will know Rowan Williams' book, Lost Icons, which he published to mark the shift between the last millennium and this. And he writes there about childhood as a time of latency. That is to say, a period in which nothing is demanded of us. An extended time in which we can experiment with ways of being human, and we will not be made accountable for the consequences. Everyone here knows that latency is a necessary condition of creativity. We know this because the sermon that will not come when we are at the desk downloads into our heads the minute we forget about it. Walk the dog, lie sleepless awake, wander around a charity shop. We also know that when a child has had much too much responsibility early in life, perhaps as a carer or worse, we understand then the vital importance of that child learning how to play. And we human beings do not outgrow our need for open, experimental time. At every age, wasting time and developing as a person are one and the same. Adolescents, you will have noticed, are very good at this. Psychologists who work on the formation of identity agree that 18 to 24 is the window in which, quite simply, we become the people that we are to be. And that makes me think, actually, that the gospel is never more powerful than when it's preached to people that age, and perhaps the secularists who run the university I work for know that, and that's why they try to sideline all those aspects of the Christian tradition from the institution. But anyway, picture university. That's an environment dense with 18 to 24-year-olds, and so is almost a laboratory for watching human development in action. And if you peer into the petri dish of a university, what you will see is people wasting time. Because if you want discovery, you have to waste time. A chemist once said to me, "Oh, science doesn't happen when your results come out as you expected. No. Science happens when you look at your results or into your text and you say, now that's funny." And nothing, not the millions, the billions that the modern university costs, can dictate the pace of discovery. Demands on academics to produce more and more books and articles doesn't produce more discovery. It just produces more and more books and articles, many of which, my friends, will never be read because there is no real discovery in them. Academic work, in its essence, is a sitting still through sometimes delight and absorption, repetition, even boredom, and holding open a space for the possibility of surprise. Sitting still, sometimes in delight, often in repetition or even boredom, holding open a space for surprise, is something to which every person here has a vocation. But we call it prayer. However, universities are hotbeds of another kind of time wasting. It's happening in bars, it's happening in pubs, it's happening, along with other things, in student bedrooms late at night. These hours and hours that adolescents spend doing nothing, but doing it together. Now, if hearing that the academic endeavor is somehow luxurious and haphazard makes us uncomfortable, then hearing that students spend most of their time lounging around chatting on the government's dollar, that is going to leave us positively scandalized. And what I want to say is, It's exactly that impulse that we need to conquer. In fact, to reverse, if we want to grow into the full stature of Christ. Now I'm going to draft in a little bit of help. Some of you will know the work of Herbert McCabe, who was a Dominican the last century. He died about 20 years ago. And he has a celebrated article on prayer, which he describes, and I quote, as an absolute waste of time. And he goes on, I reckon that more than 80% of our reluctance to pray consists in our neurotic fear of wasting time. And is it any wonder? Only yesterday, a friend of mine put her daughter in nursery for the first time, and her daughter came home with a list, I am not joking, of learning objectives. This child is 9 months old. She cannot walk or talk yet, but she is already being told that her time must be productive. What hope for us if that is how we begin? And what, by the way, is that saying about the brothers and sisters among us who will never walk or talk and who cannot learn anything? What values is that laying down? Well, I can't say for sure whether learning objectives for infants are productive, but I know that wasting time is. Not of money or of worldly standards of success, definitely not of those. More of things like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. In other words, what wasting time produces is character and friendship, which are the very things that Christians care about, or that we say we care about. So perhaps I could spend a little bit of time with you now, just considering why it is that, given that, we are still neurotically afraid of wasting time. I think we have to name the class dimension of this. We see wasting time as luxurious, something the idle classes do while the poor pay for it with the sweat of their brow. And we didn't need Marx to tell us that. We had Aristotle in the 4th century saying, yeah, if happiness consists in contemplation, then it's the people with private incomes who'll be happy. But like every injustice, that is based on a lie. Like all really clever lies, it's one that we've internalized so that we start to think of ourselves as people who should be giving value for money. But it is a lie, nonetheless. Time to lavish is not a luxury. It is the birthright of everybody who is made in God's image. In paradise, they do not work, they tend. Access to leisure, and I'm including in that the leisure of a liberal tertiary education, is scandalously unequal. It is a disgrace that we have allowed a world so unequal to grow up. And it is our sacred duty as prophets of God's kingdom to take back that good gift which God intends for all his children. No less a man than Martin Luther King Jr. said, I find I have so much to do in the day, I can't get by with less than 3 hours prayer each morning. There is not a man who felt himself entitled to aristocratic privilege or of shirking his to-do list. And we already proclaim this. We proclaim this as a church in word and in sacrament. Paul says in Romans something we hear so often we forget what it means. He says we are co-heirs with Christ. Every one of us, an heir and an heiress to nothing less than a kingdom. And in our traditional rite of baptism, which I hope many of us still use, the baptismal candidates are anointed with the oil of chrism, the oil used to anoint monarchs at their coronation, a tangible sign that nobody is less than a prince in the kingdom of God. If we don't already see that equality, that enthroning of one another in our society, well then, that is all the more reason why we must work and act as if it were already true. We're all in Adam. This is Paul again in 2 Corinthians. Here we are in Adam, and in comes Christ. And we, the baptized, are all in Christ as well. This parallel reality that we inhabit. We're waiting for the day when Adam falls away, and Christ is all in all. You do not get to be Martin Luther King Jr. without being determined that you will inhabit that eschatological reality right now. So here are 2 eschatological realities for you. 1, time is not a commodity. It is a gift from God. 2, you are not a commodity. You are a gift from God. Our time and ourselves, I say again, is what we have been given to give. Perhaps I could encourage us then, among other things, to be considered in the way that we talk about gifts, to be sure that we're not building a 2-tier church where places where a lot of professional skills and experience are well represented in the congregation are one sort of church, and congregations with a different demographic are a different sort of church. Because insofar as they are the church, every single Christian community is doing the same thing. They are attending to one another in love. It's wonderful that we have diversified those from among whom ordained and lay ministries are now drawn. We could do a lot more to diversify it further, but it is still a wonderful start. But the last thing that we should feel is diffident about being only a vicar or only a lay reader, as though somehow we'd be better at those things, better deacons and bishops, if only we were actually a doctor or a counsellor, or we knew about accounting or marketing, and we did those things for the church instead. I repeat, it is wonderful that so many people have so many gifts to offer the church. And at the same time, let us see whether we can keep alive that strand of our vocation that runs back to the church's earliest days, which teaches that it is the vocation of the Christian to have no vocation. My husband, who is neither an Anglo-Catholic nor a priest, recently annoyed a group of pious Anglo-Catholic priests when they asked him to come and address him on St. Ambrose's treatise, The Duties of the Clergy, because he pointed out, with a sort of anti-clerical relish that may be reserved for the spouses of clergy, he pointed out that the clerical calling and the Christian calling in the eyes of St. Ambrose are one and the same. It is the calling to have no calling, besides being human, and to make ourselves as free as possible to spend time being human together. So I'd like to talk a little bit now about what does emerge when we do conquer our fear and spend time together being human, why we can't afford to sideline that aspect of our calling. I don't pretend for a second to understand the pressures and the demands and the situations that each person here finds themselves in, not for a second. But I do know that if we think we can wait for the pressures on us to evaporate, we will be waiting forever. If God has called you to a pastoral ministry, it is for a wonderful reason. God trusts you. He trusts you to be somebody who knows how to laugh with those who laugh and weep with those who weep. What a tender vocation that is, and how easily squashed by other things. How easily our lives could become like those books and articles that no one reads because there's no real discovery in them. Both in laughter and in weeping, what we need above all is time wasted on us, lavished, poured out without counting or caring to count. And we know this. Most of our happiest times, not only in our families, but among Christians, are just times of wasting. Anyone who's new to Britain may have noticed the obsession with visiting zoos. Visiting zoos and stately homes, what is that? Time wasting together doesn't need to be strenuous. It doesn't need to be organized fun like Monica in Friends. The best things aren't. I'm talking about the plonk down an extra bowl of spaghetti at the kitchen table kind of being caught up and involved in the simple things of another's life, in just the way that the Holy Trinity wants to catch us up and involve us in the radical simplicity of its life, which is just love given and love received. Perfect joy. And in perfect sorrow, which none of us can go a lifetime and hope to escape, then we need wasted time even more. Grief is completely incapacitating. We can resist that physical process if we want, but more wisely, we will accept it and accept the time wasting that effective grieving demands. I'm sure I don't need to tell you about the oceans of wretched, wasted time, helpless to dictate the pace of our feelings, let alone what they are. But it's in that vastness that healing takes place. People say grieving is work, and they are absolutely right, because the feelings are exhausting. But it's a work that's happening in us and to us in latency. It's not something that we do. Jesus, in his wilderness, was not doing anything, but we do not think that that means nothing was happening. Time wasted, lavished, poured out without counting or caring to count. That is a precondition for every kind of human growth. Besides the physical, for which you do need the food that households in this country can no longer afford, and I hope that the next Prime Minister takes note of that. But I'm minded of a teacher in a school in this diocese, not this school, who asked his pupils, come on then, give me a definition of poetry. Oh, kids came up with all kinds, about meter and blah, blah, blah. And he listened to them all, and then he said, here's my definition. Poetry wastes paper. Poetry does waste paper. The expression, the great experiment with language that is human communication, isn't for anything. It wastes paper and it wastes time as well, and thank God for that. Because every minute that someone is spending reading or writing poetry is a minute not spent planning a drone strike or a benefits cut. Now I'm going to be boring. Leisure, the basis of culture, a work you may know by the theologian Josef Pieper. Now he refers there to the totalitarian world of work. He's writing in Germany in the 1950s, so obviously we immediately think he's talking about the other side of the Iron Curtain, right? But is the world of consumer capitalism and increasingly global capitalism less totalitarian in the demands it makes of workers? People in this country right now are obliged to work for pay which won't heat their homes, let alone buy them. Neither. And all the while, that same consumer capitalist system and lots of corporate cultures are heavily invested in telling us we are not enough. Pieper writes, and I quote, "The family resemblance between poetry, philosophy, and prayer, poetry, philosophy, and prayer, is such that whenever one is denied, the remainder cannot live. For where the religious spirit is not tolerated, where there is no room for poetry and art, philosophy cannot prosper." I don't assume that you care for philosophy any more than I assume you care for poetry. But I take it for granted if you've got the bishop's license, you do care about the religious spirit. The religious spirit that the saints reveal for us is that we are free. Freedom is on the inside, or it is nothing at all, because it has to be. Maybe part of our Christian witness to an increasingly totalitarian world of work could be to make a decision never to despise or condemn any form of human time wasting, even the ones that aren't to our taste. Time wasting is the human spirit unbroken. It is God's children proclaiming on the skateboard park, in the pub, wherever, each to the other, you are enough. Now, I know, as it happens, that I'm talking to people who know how to be lavish. Because in the pub with Bishop Christopher a couple of years ago, he told me, he said, my diocese has gone from a simple calculation of parish share to a generosity-based system of giving. And he told me, with great joy and pride, how, by God's grace, it had made you more generous, not less. All the same, even in Southwark Diocese, there are times when every one of us feels unwilling to be lavish. I've scoured the internet. If anyone can help me afterwards with a YouTube link, I'd love to hear it, but dimly remembered and greatly loved from childhood, a sketch of Sir Lenny Henry about the best room in the house that is magnificent but untouched. No one is to go in it. And a little boy running in and saying, "Mum, mum, 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 the Queen and the Pope are at the front door. Shall I let them into the best room?" The best room, never. When we think of lavishing, those of us who perhaps spend more time reading the Gospels than hunting around on YouTube for Lenny Henry sketches, when we think of lavishing, of course, we think of the woman with a spikenard. St. Luke doesn't quite have Sir Lenny's comic timing any more than I do, but he does show us something cherished by many, I know, which is Jesus receiving the sacrament of holy unction before his death from a woman. And better than that, sticking up for her when someone criticizes. But anyway, close as that is to many hearts, we know the story. Judas objects to wasting, and Jesus rebukes him, and that is a rebuke to all of us. If the person in front of you right now is not worthy of all your time and attention to lavish, who will be? What am I saving this time, this money, this best room for? The frightening truth that Jesus Christ brings into the world is that everyone is lovable up close. And we will not get close enough to find out how lovable they are until we conquer our neurotic fear of wasting time. I was having a lovely conversation with Andrew Morton-Mumby just before I came up here. And it made me think about how we do spend our time. What are we doing with it? It's not bad things, I assume. But he was saying how satisfying it is to have something material to show for a ministry that is mostly immaterial. And of course, that is attractive and rewarding. A sermon well preached, a good bit of admin done if that's your bag, depth of learning, a good liturgical presence. These are things that make us feel like we've achieved something, like we're competent adults, experts even. And it's true that wasting time does not offer us that, because it is an exercise in radical equality. We can't use it to feel competent and adult over against any imagined or real other. It makes me think, in fact, of a rather naughtily provocative thing that the feminist Germaine Greer says in her 1960s feminist classic polemic, The Female Eunuch. She says, the idea of lesbianism is very threatening in a phallocentric culture, because it provides a reminder that actually, for pleasure, the penis might not be as important as we want to think. And in just the same way, wasting time is threatening in a technocratic and hierarchical culture, because it's something that anyone can do for anyone else. And here's the challenge to us as a church. Are we content to do what the differently abled, the very young, like lovely Jeffrey there, the very old, the very poor, those without skills and training, those with no English, can do just as well as we can do it, or even better? I know people who can do that just as well as we can do it, and even better. They do it effortlessly, and they are 18 to 24-year-olds in their bars and in their bedrooms, doing nothing. But the nothing that they are doing is two things. They are cultivating character, lavishing attention on one another in a way that proclaims and reinforces what I want to proclaim and reinforce to you. You are enough, just as you are. Adequate to the task of offering love, adequate to the task of receiving love, which is the life of the Trinity. And the other thing they're doing, and this is the last thing I'm going to say before I wind up, they are pouring time and attention into the cultivation of friendships which are going to last them for the rest of their lives. So very briefly, I'd like to talk about friendship as an indispensable part of our Christian calling. It seems to me that friendship is the inevitable outcome of wasting time. If you waste enough time with someone, a friend is what they become, however you began. If believing something means living as though it were true, then to waste time is to believe that friendship is more important than anything else. The fathers of the church certainly thought so. Of many quotations I could pull out, Gregory of Nyssa quotes, "In the end, the only thing that matters in this life is friendship with God." Human friendship now, it has a very special quality. And that is that it's the only relationship of those we enjoy in our lives that can, that must, be simultaneously ferociously loyal and partisan, and at the same time utterly promiscuous. Anyone, everyone could be a friend. It crosses every barrier, age, race, background, you name it. Aristotle, that hero again, he says only equals can be friends. Well, all right. Then by the converse of Aristotle's law, if you're friends, you must be equals. We know that friendship is our calling above all, because that subversive and life-giving calling, the word friend was cast at our Lord as an insult by his enemies. A glutton and a drunkard, that is to say, a time waster, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. And I hope that any insult that is thrown at our Lord, up to and including his cross, we pick up and we wear as a badge of honor. I began with a story. I'm going to end with a story. Sometimes these adolescents who are lavishing time on one another, they'll decide to lavish a bit on the chaplain. Be kind. And here's an example. A new student arrived from Eastern Europe and began coming to my room about fortnightly, I'd say. Now, usually when students come to talk to the chaplain, they come and they unburden what's on their mind, and you talk about it, you listen, you signpost a bit, they go away. Ho, not this time. Hour after hour after hour in my room, aimless conversation about nothing. Was I frustrated? I was frustrated. Things to do, people. 6 months of these visits. And then one day, this student, with enormous difficulty, unburdened himself of a revelation that was to change the rest of his life. And not for a single minute of all those hours had I seen it coming. He will already have forgotten my name, but I will never forget his. He gave me 2 gifts. 1, a reminder of why we really waste time on one another. And 2, the even greater gift of patiently allowing me time to become a person who was worthy of his trust. That doesn't happen from behind a computer screen. There is no MBA in attention. There is no talent pool for loving people. Studies after studies show a rich or a busy church is not, ipso facto, a successful one. To be the people that God is calling us to be, we need do nothing except to be the people whom God is calling us to be. And while I'm on this apophatic role, clericals are not a uniform. A stipend, those who receive one, is not a wage. Ministry is not work. It is our part in the saving mission of Christ, who never saw a sick person that he didn't heal, a grieving person that he didn't console, or a dead person that he didn't bring back to life, and he did it all because when he saw someone in front of them, he saw only them. Adolescents are not resigned to injustice yet. They know that every person is equally worthy of honor, and especially, as we, the church, would phrase it, the lost, the last, and the least. Student radical is very often Jesus radical. Not always, but often. The question is, are we? If we are not wasting time together, if we are not making unlikely friendships, if we are not living a visibly different way, well, no one here needs to be told what salt which has lost its saltiness is good for. To conclude, I've recently become a parent, and it makes you really notice what parents do. Which things will I pick up and which things will leave that one? And what I've noticed is that parents are all trying to get their children to do things. Hurry up, get in the car, have you got your bag, clean your teeth? And it makes me wonder, why should children conform to adults' agenda? unless they can see that we conform to their agenda. We are not more important than they are, just more powerful. If we want them to value our priorities, perhaps it would help a lot if we did more to show that we value theirs by getting down on the ground and playing with the toy cars without looking at the clock. In the interval since I myself was a student, the lives of students have become more and more pressured. The pressure on them to commodify their time, to monetize their talents, to focus on transferable skills and employability above all else, not on latency. And yet, the unbroken spirit of human love and attention is unquenchable in them. Time and again, I have seen how passionately these reflective young people treat the values that the church espouses in principle, and for completely understandable reasons, is starting to lose its grip on in practice. I don't say students are perfect. Is there an unhealthy kind of puritanism in a lot of the moral culture among young people? There absolutely is. Is there a still more excellent way, as Paul calls it, a way with mercy and not judgment? You bet your life there is. We could for sure evangelize today's radical youth with that more excellent way. But first, and rather more urgently, we should let them evangelize us. Thank you.
Mel, thank you very much. That was extraordinary. When I go this evening as Chancellor of Southbank University to meet my Vice-Chancellor, I will tell him and see what he says. You've offered to take a couple of questions. We don't have very much time, but we have the facility for a couple of questions, if that's okay. And Alan and Carol have the mic. So there literally will be time for a couple, and then Carol will give some reflections on your words, and we'll move on to the next stage in proceedings. So hands up, please, anybody who would like to respond. If it can be brief and a question, that'd be great. If it can be brief and a point, that would be okay. So I've put my glasses on. Any responses from the hall? Yes. Oh yes, in the front row. The Archdeacon. The Archdeacon. Do you want to stand up so people can see?
Okay, hi. That wasted a bit of time, didn't it? I'm the Archdeacon of Reigate. How does a healthy understanding of theology of work fit in with your glorious wasting time?
I would love to hear someone with a healthy theology of work that they actually live. And I'm not saying that facetiously. I really would like to meet someone who is doing it in action, because we've read the books. But here's a theological take on a vicar's working life from a friend in another diocese. And the hero of the story is an archdeacon. You'll love it. He was frazzled, because making decisions is really costly. And many lives of vicars, not only vicars, every minute of every day is trying to decide how to use the next half hour, because there are so many things to do, you can't do them all. And just deciding wears you out. And he spoke to his archdeacon, who was brilliant, said, have 2 days off a week, do whatever it takes. A little tip for you there, Maureen. And he came to this conclusion. Every morning, he goes to his church, he says morning prayer, he comes home, and he reads all morning. Because that is what it takes for him to be a human being, out of which he's got something to offer other people. And maybe he needed to cut back on a few things as well. I mean, part of the difficulty with the fact that incumbents in particular are those who have the most contact with the diocese, means that things come through them, which means that they don't get passed on, they end up stopping with the vicar. And I can't theologize that for you, except to say that it's not only clogging up our ministry when we do that, but it's disabling other people from having one that they could have. Reading every morning won't be for everyone, but it's an answer, and it's worked for him.
Thank you, Mel, very much. So from a question from the expensive seats, there's a question from the people who... No? I thought there was a question at the back. Other questions? Yes, Bishop.
Mel, thank you so much. I couldn't be more excited. I just said to my sister here, that's really awesome. Thank you so much. One of the things I learned as a parish priest in North London for many years was from my local Bobby, who used to just walk up and down the parish. And one day we were chatting, and I said, why do you really do this all the time? He said, well, I'm a local Bobby, I match my beat, and we call it loitering with intent. I thought that's a really interesting concept. So I went away and thought about it, and I started to try and think about how it could be relevant to me as a parish priest. And one of my senior colleagues said to me at the time, oh, well, I don't go to the school because I don't have a child at the school, so you're younger than me, you can hang around the school gates. And so we try to think about that whole concept of parish priests, just marking the beats, putting the bounds, walking up and down the parish in their clericals, hanging around the school gate. And then we developed this concept of loitering with intent. Do you think there's a place for it in the modern church today? Just thinking about what you've said. And would you advise us to do that?
Well, you're the bishop, so you're the one who can tell everyone that their calling is to loiter with intent. I don't smoke. And I think for your well-being, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to suggest that you do. But you know what? The 7 minutes it takes to suck a fag down to its filter is apparently time-wasting. It's time that you can have a conversation that isn't pointedly face-to-face with someone. They can just tell you something. And that only happens when we loiter with intent. I mean, loads of you have got dogs, haven't you? Yeah, so that you're out and about. Hooray for the dogs. But thank you, Bishop Carraway, because it's no use me saying it. It needs the bishops and the archdeacons to be saying, this is your ministry. And it's not like we don't know that. I've not told you anything today you don't already know. But I love being told old truths. And it seems like loitering with intent is one of them.
One last slot for one last question, if there is one. Gentleman at the end here, I saw first. Yes, please, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I want to ask, in this digitally smart generation with smart devices that will find our young people more in the digital environment, how will you advise, or what should the church do to meet them in this environment?
Thank you very much, Father Solomon, and it's something that I should have addressed, actually, because it is so much of how people interact with one another, and especially young people now. And I haven't at all conquered that. I've failed at that. My attitude to it is that I would prefer to model something different. So at very least, the students that I work with can see that you can have a normal social life and normal relationships without any social media presence at all. But that's easy for me to say because I'm 42. I'm not 22. I think this comes to the urgency of finding some common ground with people this age, even if it's not in social media, so that our witness becomes credible. And if our witness is credible, that's the tiny beginning of a really hard conversation about whether social media is life-giving, whether it is in fact an occasion for sin, whether we could actually relate to one another as human beings, face to face, eye to eye, and not just a load of opinions. But I think that that is so difficult for middle-aged people to get inside, and that is why I think our only chance of that being redeemed, that aspect of human interaction, is if we can find something else that the church and the youth, as it were, have got in common. I'm not optimistic, is the answer.
Mel, Reverend Dr. Mel, thank you very, very much. You've left us with a huge amount to think about, and we send you with our love to your family, to your little man, as you play around on the floor, not looking at the clock, with him for many years ahead, we hope, and to your students and to all you come into contact with. Thank you very much. And Carol's going to come up and say a word.